ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the most prolific author of Thai economy and politics, Dr. Chris Baker. He told me that he didn't have much to say, but in fact, he has a prepared and printed note, so I think it's only right for him to go first.
He's going to pay for this, you know. So, my people will come after him. I was hoping he'd go first because I've got really nothing new to say at all. So what I'm going to say is going to be very boring, and I hope I would be able to get away with it because he'd been very interesting already. The conflict that we've been seeing over the last few years is interesting because it goes on very much at two different levels. I mean, it's going on very much between the political factions, between Thaksin and his friends and his enemies. But it's also going on at a lower level, at a more sort of mass scale in the society. And it's that part of it I want to talk about, because I think it's the most interesting part, because I think it's what's driving it. I think the people at the top could, as always happens in Thailand, could make a deal, and they would love to make a deal and carve things up. And they obviously have been trying to make deals over the last few years. And why it's not working is really because the people behind them are refusing to buy into those deals and are really keeping the conflict going. So what is this? What is it that's going on in Thailand in the last 10 to 20 years that is making it really so utterly different? And I've lived here for 30 years. It's so utterly different from what it had been in the past before. We all thought of it as a society which as a society was not particularly political, and in which the politics were arranged in small groups behind closed doors by not very honest men. And that whole equation has disappeared in the last few years. So why? And really, it's because a significant section of the population has realized the potential of politics to change their own situation, and in doing so, to really change many of the inequities, injustices in this society. But that's not very unusual. This kind of thing happens in societies, all societies at some time. And it's happening a lot around the world right now, Arab Spring and things that are going on in Latin America, because of things that are happening in the public culture everywhere, the spread of information. But what is perhaps so fascinating about the Thai story is that when this sort of new group of the population demanded in, the urban middle class said no. It tried to put up its hand and stop this whole movement. And this is quite a surprise, It was really quite a surprise when it happened. So I sort of want to talk about the two sides of this. The two sides of this upsurge, and then this refusal to compromise, to go along with it. The background to this era, I think there are three things. The first is that in the previous generation, per capita income in Thailand increased 3 times. That's very few countries manage to do that in one generation. So it means everyone, more or less, it's relatively evenly distributed, that the change was relatively, is 3 times more better off than their parents. They had more, and this mattered more to the people lower down in the society than to those higher up. They suddenly, for the first time, they had more assets. and they had particularly more aspirations for their children. They also had new horizons, because what happened in this generation is people started to move a lot. People started migrating from the provinces into the towns, into the Bangkok to work, to go to the Middle East, to go to Taiwan, and so on. They could then also just move from their living room when the television came in the 1980s, and then internet has come in the last few years. And this is really education with a big capital E. They've been there, they've seen it, they know the way things are, they aren't anymore captured within the geography and the mentality of the village. And what went with that is the death of deference. It just sort of died in a way that was really quite surprising. You can still read these books, which tells you all about how deferential a society Thailand is. Forget it. I mean, it just sort of disappeared completely in the last 10 years. And the third thing that happened was the coming of elections, not so much at the national level, because they came a long time, and for many people, they weren't very moving, you know, because you voted for some big rich man who you didn't know, and you only did it once every 4 years, and it didn't seem to matter very much to you, so you sold your vote for 2 red notes. But when, from the mid-90s, they started local government, electoral local government, what then happened was you voted for someone you knew, and you could see whether he or she did good things or did bad things. And you realized at that point the power of this thing called the vote, the power for it to actually get things done for you. And the mobilization of people in local society around local elections totally changed the way politics works here. I live quite a lot of time in an upcountry town at the moment. They just have their local elections last month ago. There were 7 slates competing very, very hard against one another, loudspeakers blaring up and down the road, and the key issue was about water supply, you know, really important grassroots kind of issue. This totally changed the way people saw elections. And then along came Thaksin. And Thaksin didn't make this happen, but he saw that it was happening, and he rode on it, and he rode on it really very cleverly indeed. And he did 3 things then himself. First thing, he gave people goods, particularly the health scheme, but many others as well. And he said to them, here is a health scheme. Here now you can go to get free 30 baht medical care as a right. In the past, you could go to the government and say, I am a poor person, please give me free medical care, which of course is very demeaning for everyone else. But Thaksin said, no, here it is, it's yours as a right. And by taking that, you suddenly become a citizen, rather than just a subject, which you were in the old system. The second thing he said was, well, you know, the trouble in our country is why people are poor is because we don't have enough capitalism. If I will now lend you money, and I won't be very careful about the way I lend you money, I'll rather spray it around a bit, and this will give the opportunity for you to become as rich as me. No? And this was very appealing. It absolutely caught the mood of this society, people with rising incomes, even higher rising aspirations for their children. This idea perfectly caught the mood of the country. And then he did the third thing, which was the risky one, because then he said, trust me, don't trust any of the old gang. Forget about the Democrat Party, the bureaucrats, all those Ajahn and people who write in newspapers who preach to you all the time. Forget them. Trust me, I am your leader. And of course, by doing that, he went too far and the roof fell in on his head. Okay? But by that time, he'd become, you know, a political hero in a way that we hadn't seen here in Thailand before. Then, of course, they chuck Thaksin out, they chuck his party out twice, they roll back democracy as far as they can by rewriting the constitution, and you put back lots of repressive laws and everything else, but somehow you can't keep it down. You think if you get rid of Thaksin, you cut off the top of this movement, it will go away. Doesn't work. You cut off the next level by cutting off the party. Doesn't work. You try and actually cut off the parliament, still doesn't work. It's still there. In fact, it's getting stronger because in the end, it's coming up from below. So what then do these people want now? Well, they're saying we want more of the kind of goods that Thaksin gave us as a right. Okay? We want Thaksin back because he's the guy who we trust to give it to us. And we want elections because we understand now that elections are the thing which can really make this work for us. And remember, these two big street demonstrations in 2009 and 2010, they weren't about overthrowing the government, overthrowing the society. They were about having an election. I think this is almost quite extraordinary to have these massive demonstrations with the single demand is to hold an election because the people who are against you have overthrown the results of the past 3. Okay, so that's one side. Now, often when you have this kind of upsurge in a society like this, in fact, the people in the middle ranks, the middle classes, often see this as quite an opportunity. They see this as a chance, actually, to overthrow the old order, to overthrow the remnants of feudalism and aristocracy and all these other sort of stuff. That's really the kind of pattern that evolved in Europe, at least, and to some extent elsewhere. But quite strangely, the Thai middle class tended to turn itself against this and became highly mobilized against Thaksin and more generally against the whole politics that went with it. A lot of people who write about this just tend to ridicule the Thai middle class for doing this, seeing them as slightly crazy for doing this. I think it's quite interesting to try and understand why, rather than just dealing in ridicule. I think there's a few things about Thai urban middle class which help us to understand why they took this position. The first is that almost all of them have some Chinese roots. Almost all of them come in some way, some from very far back, some from 3 generations ago, from Chinese immigration. In the last 20 years or so, these Thai Chinese have become very dominant in urban society across everything. Not only business, the professions, the army, the police, the universities, everything. But if you go back to the 1980s, that hadn't really happened. They were dominant in business, but they were still complaining that there was a certain degree of discrimination against them for being Chinese. Okay? So even though that has gone in the last generation, even less than that, 20 years, there's still a memory there. There's still a sort of memory of a bit of insecurity in the background. The second interesting thing about this background of them as Thai Chinese is, if you like, the sort of ethnic myth, if you like. They say, we came on a boat, our ancestors, with one pillow and mat. We came with nothing. We worked hard, we exploited ourselves, we saved, we put all our money into capital and into education, and we did well. We are self-made people in the extreme. The other side of that story is that people who haven't done well, it's because it's their own fault. It's because they're stupid, or they're ignorant, or they're not educated, or they don't work hard, they're lazy. Okay? So it justifies a certain degree of certain sort of attitudes. Next thing about this urban middle class is that during the boom of foreign investment from the mid-80s onwards, their incomes went up astronomically. They went up from being, if you like, paid Thai levels to being paid international levels over about 5 years. And they've really managed to defend that level of remuneration relatively well ever since. So there's a certain sort of insecurity from the knowledge, actually, that you're overpaid compared to the society as a whole. And then the other thing